Hi Karen, how are you?
Good, Will. How are you? What do you have
Eh,
in store for us today?
Well, we were talking last week about t- this session being about woodlands and trees and so on. And for my bit, you had asked me to think about woodlands in Ireland and what I might like to share with participants of a citizen science course on that. Um, so when you say woodlands in Ireland, I think different things come to mind for people. For some people, they might envisage the Killarney National Park, old oak woodland down there, or for someone else, they might think of some local uh, Sitka spruce plantation that's up the road from them, or someone else thinks about a woodland they planted on their farm when they were growing up, or whatever else. Interestingly, I've met some people, and I think what they think is that there are no woodlands in Ireland. And I know certainly growing up, that's the perception that's put out there. You know, we had all our trees cut down. Sometimes, or maybe often, the English are blamed for cutting down all Ireland's trees. And the reality is that the history of woodland in Ireland is a bit more complex than that. So that's not exactly a true story. But one time, I remember meeting an American person in a pub or somewhere like that in Dublin one time. It might have been at a Patrick's Day festival or something, as I recall. And this person was adamant. They were telling me that there's no woodlands in Ireland. There's not. Like, he was telling me for a fact. He'd been living in Ireland for about 9 months. But I guess, that to me is kind of funny because there are lots of woodlands in Ireland, really. But what this person had in mind when they thought about woodlands was vast wilderness tracts of wilderness woodland forests. And I suppose it's fair to say that we don't have anything like that. So our woodlands are small in comparison to woodlands that you might find in other parts of the world.
Was
Okay.
it always like that, though, Will? Was Ireland always a place that didn't have woodlands? Or didn't have loads
No,
of really big woodlands?
no, certainly not. I mean, there's plenty of publications there now, good books you can get, and you can read about the history of how the Irish landscape kind of evolved since the last ice age, about 10 to 13,000 years ago, when ice started melting. Our natural landscape started evolving, where grasslands started developing, and then woodlands would slowly come in. And as time progressed, there was different types of woodland vegetation would have come to dominate. So a lot of us think that it was all before the first humans got here, or well, who knows when they got here actually, but we think it's between 5 and 10,000 years ago. But a lot of us think that whenever they came, whoever they were, that they came to this place that was a vast wilderness of just complete oak forestry. And a lot of Ireland may have been like that at the time, but it wasn't all oak forestry. We had different types. We might have had Scots pine plantations or hazel woods and so on. It's quite interesting how the forestry developed. But then, as people came in and as changed naturally as well, were increased rainfall, you started to have landscape change to do with the rainfall and wetter lands, and also to do with what the people were doing to the land, deforestation, and then agricultural practices, degrading soils, and then that led to peat formation, and forests that once were alive became dead, and they turned into peat bogs. There's a whole lot. I'm really oversimplifying the story, but there's a fascinating story of how woodland in Ireland has evolved and the different types of woodland that are there. But I think it's fair to say we don't have it. We did have large tracts of forests. Like, put it crudely, you could say that there could be a forest bigger than the size of Cork in plenty of
Right.
parts of Ireland. Whereas nowadays, a lot of our forests, they're certainly not the size of Cork, yeah, or any other county for that matter. But they may be the size of a football field, or two football fields, or three if you're lucky. And a lot of them are actually far smaller than that. So for something to be classed as a woodland, really, it's got to have trees in it and canopy. So the trees have to be old enough that they're providing a canopy, and then there needs to be enough of trees there that it's more than just a lone or tree. Yeah, or it's more than just a line of trees, that it's a whole body of them. So you could have a woodland that just has as little as 20 trees in it. In order to see what I'm on about here, we'll go on to this mapping system called GeoHive. I have it here on the screen. And this is a really cool system that's free, accessible to anyone who wants to have a look. And essentially what has been done here is that lots of different mapping data has all been put into the one system, and you can view it however you please. So right now I'm after selecting aerial premium. And with this, it's a bit like looking at satellite view on Google Earth.
Right.
And I'm going to select a few other maps as well. So I'm going to pick historic map 6-inch color from 1837.
Wow. So this is a map from 1837.
Yep. And let me see now what else I might find. Is there anything there to do with environment? Ancient and long established woodland. Look at that.
That's
So
remarkable.
all those yellow dots are where there are still pockets of ancient and long established woodland. So that's stuff that's at least 400 years old.
Wow.
And bog woodland. Oh, that's one I really like. Not too much of that. And let me see now. Will I pick anything else? There's such a huge array of stuff you can pick in here. I think that might be enough. Let me see. National Survey of Native Woodland. Okay, we'll pick that. And finally, Old Oak Woodlands, National Parks and Wildlife Service. We'll pick that. Right? And what else will I pick? National Parks Wildlife Service. I think that's the protected areas. Yeah, not too many places came up there. There's so many options, like, and that's just in the environment piece of this mapping. So everything I selected there, what happened is it came up under my selection. So I have all these maps selected, and if I turn down the transparency on one of them or deselect them, they can disappear. So I can play around with these. Where they become visible or invisible to whatever extent you want that at. So I'm slowly making certain things disappear or reappear. We're back to the aerial premium. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go for a little trip to Galway, where I'm based right now. And after that, what we might do is you might go down the road to Cork and have a look at some woodlands around there where a lot of the participants on the program we're doing are living. Okay, so let's go to Galway on our holidays. So where I am is in and around this area here, Karen. And you can see there's little pockets of woodland around me right now on the aerial premium. So this is basically aerial imagery that's most recent, but it still might be around 10 years old. I'm not quite sure of the year on it. So right now, we're based in and around here, and you can see there's all these trees around. This stuff here, this is actually woodland. So if we were to go and survey this, habitat map it, we'd be mapping this as wooded area. So what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to have a look to see, was there woodland there back along in the 1830s?
So you're making this map more visible now. Okay, wow. So now we've got that old 1836 map.
Yeah, 1837. It's pre-famine, basically. And this is a really good map. Like, this was top mapping of its day. So you see there, can you start to see the mapping? We'll go back. Let's go out of it again. So we talk about Ireland having cut down all its trees, but the nature of this landscape is that it has actually become more wooded from back then.
So on the old map there, I don't see any woodlands marked out.
No.
So this would all just have been grassland.
Yeah, or there's areas here that are shown as kind of wet, boggy areas, and maybe there was trees within them. Who knows? I'm not quite sure what their criteria was to class it as woodland, but it certainly indicates that tree woodland habitats have evolved here. Woodlands can develop quite quickly in a place, but see over here now, there's Rossleague Point. Is there woodlands there anywhere? So look, interesting, huh? And that area, Rossleague, there's a fairly old house there, you know, but the chances are that maybe whoever built that house, I'm guessing now, you know, not historian, but perhaps they planted trees at the time. And the trees that are all here, some of them might be around 100 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what I'm going to do, because it's quite interesting, there's a significant woodland near here. It's in a place called Coilmore Abbey, quite famous. It's over the road. And there's the gardens, and you can see all this woodland here. See all that? See, it's marked in the map. So that woodland was planted back then. I think it is a planted woodland originally, but sometimes you see with a lot of the old, we'll say manor houses, they really valued woodland for hunting and for other reasons. So you'll find that a lot of the ancient woodlands that have been preserved, it was the lords, the gentry who had preserved them, or people essentially who were of English ancestry. So in one sense, it's interesting. A lot of the areas where there's very English influence, we have woodlands, and in the areas where there was less so, then we don't have them at all. So that might, you know, I'm not saying anything, but it's just interesting when you start to look at it. Now, coming back again to the present day here, so there's a woodland we found that was there then, and it's still there now. But where I'm based, we found a woodland that wasn't there then, and it is there now. Okay. Later on, we'll show you a place where there was woodland and there isn't any now. Okay, so you could expect to find anything. But what I want to show you now next is the type of woodland that a lot of people say, yeah, we have woods in Ireland, all right, but they're only the old Christmas tree ones that were planted by Cuilche back in the 60s. Okay, so the way some people talk, you'd swear that's all that we have here in Ireland.
Yeah.
So we're going to go take a look at that sort of conifer plantation woodland now next. And you'll see how big some of them can be. Can you make anything out there now on the landscape? See these?
So the sort of darker green blotches in the landscape. Yes, I can see those. They're quite big.
They're conifer plantations.
Conifer plantations.
Yeah. So to give someone an idea, somewhere in here there's a football field and you can't see it. Let's see if we can make it out yet, can we? Just look at the size of that corner of the woodland there now. And that's only 10% of the size of the woodland. Can we find a football field? That's the football field there, see it? As in yes. A GAA pitch. Yeah. So look at the size of your GAA pitch. And now look at the size of, here's the little GAA pitch now, just there. It's nearly out of sight. You can barely make out the GAA pitch now, and look at the size of that. So that conifer woodland is like well over 100 GAA pitches in size. Huge. And it's more or less a single species woodland, what we call a monoculture. Not a lot of diversity of life in a place like that. Very dark. If you go into it, you can see hardly anything.
And all of those patches of that darker green that we can see there, that's all conifer plantation.
Yes.
Wow.
And that type of woodland is quite controversial. And a lot of the time when people talk about planting trees, sometimes they might be just talking about that stuff, you know. So in the environmental sector, that's quite a topical woodland type. A lot of people aren't really fans of it, shall we say. But that's
well, it's planted to be cut down, isn't it? It's a crop like wheat or potatoes. You plant it and then you cut it down to be used as paper and other wood products.
Exactly, yeah. And the way it's managed is it's quite drastic. The measures that it's clear felled basically. So when you say it's planted to be cut down, it's all planted at once and it's all cut at once. Whereas a lot of people would say that's not a very environmentally friendly or type of forestry management, because it has a big sudden impact on the environment. And if you could, people talk about selectively thinning out forestry, tree by tree or this bit by that bit, as opposed to the whole lot. So that's one of the issues with that type of woodland. And then there can be problems with it, with acidifying the river systems, and also with the way it may be treated, managed with chemicals and so on. But on the plus side, it's a quick and easy crop to grow. So there's reasons why it was put in too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to say really that it's good or bad, but it is in itself, this type of Sitka plantation forestry is really it's an interesting thing to look into. And we're going to, in a while, go and visit some Cuilche recreational forests. And a lot of those woodlands, they were managed by Cuilche, so semi-state Irish forestry company, responsible for more woodlands in Ireland really than any other organization. And Cuilche have a number of sites that are recreation sites as opposed to commercial forestry. And some of these were formerly Sitka spruce plantations, and now over time, as they're removing the spruce, they're bringing back in native trees. So that's the thing about the point, the trees planted here as well, Karen, is that they're not native trees to Ireland. Okay. So what we'll have a little play around with the map now as well is we'll just have a check and we'll see, is there anything, in the area I'm in, is there any ancient and long established woodland? No.
Oh, down in the corner there, I think.
Did you spot something? Ah, hiding. Yes. Ard Bear. So I wonder where that is.
Again, it looks like compare it to the conifer woodland, it's like a tiny little patch.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when we look up this woodland, it shows up in the provisional inventory of ancient and long established woodland. That's how we saw it. There's documentation, you can read about it, and it's in the National Survey of Native Woodlands. But there isn't really. Malmore House is surrounded by 35 acres of ancient woodland on the shores of Ardbear. Yeah.
Again, around one of the grand old houses, and they probably protected it, and that's why it's still there.
Yeah. Ballynahinch, around an old house.
Oh, that looks
very
a bit
clear.
better. That's a decent size one.
Yeah. Around an old house. And there's lovely walks you can do down by Ballynahinch, but you see, landscape level, these are few and far between.
And they're not joined up. There's big gaps between them.
It's just little pockets of old woodland that was lucky enough to survive. That might be a way to put it. And old oak woodlands. Okay, so what this means is that somewhere in these squares, something has been classified as old oak woodland. but you
But it
don't.
might
So
just
that
be
doesn't
a
mean,
tiny little corner of the square. Okay.
yeah.
Okay, well, there is so much information in this. What I want to find out, I live, close to Cork City, so I want to go and find a native woodland, maybe even an ancient woodland or an old woodland to go for a walk near Cork City. Can I do that on this map?
Sure. Let's check it out.
Yeah.
So look at this now. Cork City is in and around here. Foti North, Foti Island, Ballyannon Wood. You know where that is?
I do. And I think, I hope our participants might know where it is as well.
Yeah. And Ballyedmond Wood. Some you would never realise where they are, but places like Blarney Castle, there's some famous trees there. There was a tree there that won a European competition or something for the most
Yes, it was a
interesting
yew tree, I think. Yeah.
And Currabinny Woods. This now are the ones that are just showing up in the ancient woodland. So there's sections of ancient woodland in these places. National Survey of Native Woodlands. So more places start showing up. Rochestown Wood. Pigeon Wood. Glenbower Wood. Glenbower is quite a well-known woods in East Cork, so it's not showing up as native woodland, or sorry, as long established, but it's showing up as native woodland survey. Be one of bog woodlands around here. So turning off the ancient and long established, and we'll go in now on the historic map. Will we, Karen, and have a look? You want to go into Middleton?
Let's see what it looked around Cork.
Will we go to Ballyannon near Middleton, where we're based? So it's shown up there. That's the National Survey of Native Woodlands. But you actually see the woodland.
Ballyannon Woods, yeah.
It's bigger than that, yeah. And it's not in the old oak woodlands, even though there is a section just along here that we're familiar with, very small, of old oak woodland. So that somehow didn't get into the survey. It's a very small bit of it, that habitat type. So there's Ballyannon. Let's have a look at the 6-inch map, will we?
So this is the old map from more than 100 years ago.
Look at that. It's almost identical.
Wow. Yeah, it is almost absolutely identical.
Yeah. But there's another thing that we haven't mentioned, though, another habitat type, which I think it's fair. It is a woodland habitat type, really. It's hedgerows. Yeah, they're long, linear habitats that have trees growing in them. Particularly if they're allowed to grow and not be cut too often, especially if they're allowed to grow up tall. They've got hawthorns and elms and elder and ash, blackthorn, and all kinds of trees found in hedgerows. So they are forestry systems, really, but they're planted originally, they're put in there for fields. So you see all these field boundaries here. The majority of all those are actually probably stone walls, systems, or hedgerows, but have hedges growing in them. So think of them like a woodland structure. And earlier you mentioned how a lot of those little pockets of ancient woodland are disconnected from each other. So if there are species of wildlife that live in those and depend on them, and the woodlands are too small, they need to be able to get around to other woodlands. How do they do it? You know, if you're a bat and you depend on something like a hedgerow to navigate, how do you get from Ballyannon Woods to some other woods up the road, like I don't know, where'll show up? This guy up here. And a lot of the time, there's certain species they would use maybe wooded river sides or hedgerows to navigate. And another thing that has happened in our wooded landscape, we go back to Ballyannon here for a minute, is if I turn off the historic 6-inch map, just have a look at this area here. This will be largely hedgerows, okay? These lines around the
so that's
of the
fields,
field
yeah, fields and hedgerows, lots of fields.
Okay, so there's still a good few of them around here. What about this section? Okay, so look at these lines. Can you see this is the new line behind? Can you see that? I have the two maps overlaid with each other. So that's gone, that's gone, that's gone, that's gone, 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 gone. All that's gone now.
So what's been happening, it looks like, is all those little fields, the hedgerows have been taken out to make bigger fields.
Mm-hmm. And also, a beekeeper, I remember saying it to me a few years back, said hedgerows are a real important part of Ireland's woodland, yeah, of the trees that we have in our country. But he said the way they're being managed, it's like as if they're barely allowed to even be alive, because the hedgerows are cut so short and they're not allowed to grow ever, so they don't flower, or they're not thick enough or tall enough to provide sufficient habitat for, you know, birds to nest in or whatever. And he said he said you should think of Ireland's hedgerows as like a man's face, yeah, that he's like the way we have them, they're really clean shaven, yeah, and you'd never know that they were woodland. But if we just leave them grow a bit, yeah, if they were all left to grow, the amount of, say, woodland flowering that would be happening in the country could be greatly increased just if we let our hedgerows grow 50% more than we currently do. You know, so their hedgerows really are this huge resource that are there, yeah, and we're not realizing their potential from a woodland or a wildlife perspective.
I think, again, it's one of those things where we want you to do less work. Cut your hedgerows less often. Manage them less. Do less work on them.
So I want to show you two other things now. Quilcha Woodlands. There's a recreation site. It's a different website we'll go on to in a minute. And I want to take you to a place that's one of the most important woodlands in our country. It's in Cork. You guess where it is?
I have an idea. It is a place that we...
Up this river.
Up the Lee. Towards, am I thinking Macroom? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Ah.
So if you zoom in, you can see all these little channels with islands, and they're all wooded in oak forestry. And we've had other examples of this habitat type in other parts of the country, but not this much of it. And if you follow it, this is quite a vast system. Some of that was probably at that point even after being cut over and converted to pasture for grazing. This system here was a, and a lot of it still remains, but what it is, it's an alluvial woodland. So that's alluvial, meaning that's the stuff that the river carries, the sediment, drops it out, creates all these islands, and it's like it's essentially an inland woodland delta. And it's meant to be one of only 4 such systems like this in the world. So I've heard. Maybe that's not true, but it's extremely significant, even in a European perspective. So this is the Gira back then. And I'm going to show you something here now. See that? This is where it is now.
So we've lost a lot of that braided system where all those trees were growing. Wow. That's all flooded.
Flooded.
And what caused that?
A dam that was built for basically the Lee. And not the Inniscarra Dam that more people are familiar with. There's a second dam upstream that was created to be able to have an additional backup water supply for the Inniscarra hydroelectric power system. So it's debatable whether that dam ever really needed to be built at all. But anyway, it was back in the 50s or 60s, and the result being, if you drive out here today and do this walk here, it's lovely. You can still tap into remnants of the old forestry. It's a lovely area to visit because you can walk here. But what you see out here is a whole load of standing deadwood trees that essentially the trees died when the water levels rose. So when I see that, I think it's a kind of a sad image. It's the one that struck me the most when I discovered it. I had to do some survey on it again when I was in college, and it was like the disappearance of, this piece here in particular. It's lost. And it's just so unfortunate. Something that's so old and magical.
And as you said, quite rare and unique, not just an island in the world.
Yeah. But it's not all lost. So look at all this still here. The system is still there. It just, it just took a bit of you can't really see it quite in that extent, but it just took a bit of a hammering. So this is a different online resource. This is the Quilter Recreation Map. So these are all forestry sites, and we can zoom into Cork and we can see again what's there. These are all Quilter woodlands, different types of woodlands. Most of them are. Two of them in here in Middleton. And here again is Ballyannon. You click on it, there's a web page for Ballyannon Woods. It gives a whole description of the wood. You can get directions there if you don't already know. It'll tell you where you can park your car and so on. The things you can do within Ballyannon Woods. Nice pictures. And there's trails. They have a hidden gem. The hidden gem is that the wood is coated in a glorious carpet of bluebells from mid-April to May.
Well, that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, walking trails, trail map, downloaded pit stops, other things that you can look up. We'll have a look at the map that they have for it.
So this is a great way of finding forests that are accessible, that, if you need wheelchairs, or if there's good trails or if they're difficult trails, you can figure out before you even visit what kind of forest would be good for you to go to.
Yes, you can. Now, it can be a bit of a minefield sometimes to find that sort of information, but that's one of the aims of this website is to be such a resource. But what it's actually coupled with, they don't quite, here they have access for all.
Oh, okay.
So they tell you what is accessible or not. But another way to do that is often you can find these woodland resources in a website called Irish Trails.ie. Find your trail. So walking, are we looking for a walking trail? County, let's go to Cork.
Cork, yeah.
Grade.
Easy.
So multi-accessible.
Oh, even better.
Okay, so that's the key. That's the key. Yeah. So it's multi-access, length any, apply.
That's not great.
So that is not great. Yeah. And that's meant to be, now that could be a website glitch, but this is representative. I would say if I had conversations with other people who have physical disabilities, and this is a bit of an issue. Now, I know that that's actually a mistake because there is a few such trails and they're just not showing up. So we'll try multi-access moderate and see if anything shows up. No trails found.
And if we try the whole of Ireland? Or does it have to go to county? Any?
No trails found.
So they're not classifying them.
There's something's not right here. It's not that they don't exist. Okay, so multi-access, any, walking, some have turned up. But no. So actually, you know, that's something worth highlighting. This has come up as an unexpected thing, really, and maybe it's appropriate thing to discuss in class. But I know I used to do some work in trails development, and it was much easier to find information online about this. And this online systems that are there in Ireland appear to have become worse in that regard. All right, Karen. So what would be nice is not just to have us talk about these woodlands, but to see some pictures of them. So we'll do a quick search around the internet now and we'll find some photos to show you some of the woodland types we were talking about. So one quick one that might be worth a search is Killarney Oak Woodlands. We'll see what we get in the images front there. Ah, yes. There you have it. Nice. Look at all that moss. I think these are actually yew forests. You see that?
Oh, I look at that and I'm immediately just happier and more relaxed. It's just one of the most beautiful sights in the world.
Yeah, that's old yew forest in Killarney National Park, I would say, because these limbs, they look like natural, and that's yew growing in its natural form. And just to go on that topic, when I talk about yew, oh, there's some classy ones come up. It's this tree, you typically see it quite monitored in a graveyard, or sorry, like this, manicured, I should say, sorry, not monitored. See, I'm thinking citizen science. You see that one? People may have noticed trees like that in and around churches and graveyards, or yew trees, but the forest we saw a while ago was a yew in its natural form. So here we have Sitka spruce plantation. Sitka spruce, the most important crop in Ireland, bar none. That's from a newspaper article. This is what it's like inside the forests. See this image?
You'll notice, yeah, look at all the trees. They're all the same height. They're all the same age, and there's nothing growing underneath the canopy layer. You have one layer in this forest, the canopy, that's the top over you, and nothing else underneath. Yeah. It actually looks a bit like a nuclear winter in there.
It does. Hazel, woodlands, burren. See all this wooded habitat? This is the burren, that's limestone. Really famous place from a nature perspective. And they have magical woods there too. But they actually don't want them taking over the whole landscape, because grazing of animals is part of the landscape here, farming. And what's been happening in the Burren is that farming, this is not intensive farming now, it's kind of traditional farming practices, maintain a balance between open landscape and wooded landscape. And if the animals are taken off the landscape, then the scrubby woodland will take over the whole lot and the diversity of habitats are lost. So the Scots pine is another type of tree that's actually native to Ireland, and up until around about 10 years ago, it was classed as it had gone extinct but was reintroduced. So we used to have Scots pine here as a native tree. It all got lost with the advent of bogs and cutting down of trees and so on. But what was discovered was that there are still little tracts of native Scots pine forestry still remained. There was a place in County Clare, I think, where they found it. So they discovered now that actually it's our rarest, one of our rarest types of native trees that still exists in the landscape. It's not just introduced. And most of the Scots pines you'll see in Ireland are from reintroduced species. But it's a really interesting type of tree. And who knows, there could be other parts of Ireland where discoveries might yet be made of other bits of Scots pine native forest. There you go, the classic image of the Scots pine tree.